Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today, we're diving into a little-known horror story that took place on March 8th, International Women's Day. This is not just a day to honor women but also a day that marks the bloody struggles of American women in history. But what if that unyielding spirit turned into a curse? Let's uncover the mysterious case at a textile factory in New York in 1908. On March 8, 1908, more than 15,000 women marched through the streets of New York, demanding basic rights, higher wages, shorter hours, and the right to vote. This was one of the major events that led to the creation of International Women's Day. But few people know that on that same day, at a small textile factory in the Lower East Side, a horrifying tragedy took place. The Hawthorne Textile Factory, where hundreds of women worked under unbearable conditions, stifling air, outdated machinery, and ruthless bosses who exploited them to the last drop of sweat. On that fateful March 8th, a group of female workers decided to go on strike unaware that it would be the last day of their lives. That afternoon, while the chants of thousands of women demanding their rights echoed through New York, the Hawthorne factory was engulfed in an eerie silence, as if the very walls knew what was coming. A young worker named Clara Hayes, the leader of the strike inside the factory, stood up, slammed her hand on the table, and shouted, "We are not slaves." But at that very moment, a deafening explosion erupted from the basement. The fire spread like a ravenous beast, devouring fabric rolls, sewing machines, and the only exit. But the horror wasn't just the flames. The heavy iron doors leading outside had all been locked from the outside. It wasn't an accident, it was a cold, calculated act by the factory owner, Elias Hawthorne, who had ordered them to be trapped inside, like animals in a cage, to crush the rebellion. Over 50 women were trapped, the smoke so thick they could no longer see each other. But in the midst of their despair, something strange happened. Clara, her voice hoarse from the smoke, began to sing an old labor song, the one they used to sing to keep their spirits up during endless hours of toil. Her voice trembled, but it was strong. And one by one, the other women joined in. Their voices rose through the flames, not as a plea for help, but as their final curse. When the firefighters finally broke through the doors, they couldn't believe their eyes. The fire had mysteriously died out, leaving behind dozens of charred bodies, but all of them were standing, hands clasped tightly together in a perfect circle around a massive sewing machine. Their eyes, though burned away by the flames, remained wide open, as if staring straight into the void. One firefighter swore he could still hear the hum of a sewing machine, though no one was left alive to press the pedal. But the most chilling account came from a delivery boy, who had peered through a small window before running to call for help. He claimed that through the smoke, he saw the silhouettes of the women not burning, not collapsing, but slowly moving around the room. They did not scream. They did not struggle. They simply walked, hands gripping sewing needles, their eyes blank and lifeless, as if their souls had already left their bodies while the flames consumed them. And then, the boy fainted, because one of those figures turned to face him, and smiled through the shattered glass. No one could explain why the fire suddenly died out on its own, or why the bodies stood in a perfect circle, as if part of some eerie ritual. But from that moment on, people began to believe that their deaths were not just a tragedy, but the beginning of something far more terrifying. After the tragedy of March 8, 1908, the Hawthorne factory was abandoned, but that was not the end. Rumors spread that when the women held hands in the fire, they had unknowingly created a curse, a ghostly thread binding their souls to that land forever. And this curse was not just a bedtime story to scare children, it was a living, breathing force. Hungry. Vengeful. Every year, on the night of March 8, residents of the Lower East Side locked their doors and refused to go outside. They say that if you stand near the ruins of the Hawthorne factory, you will hear the sound of sewing machines running, not powered by electricity, but by something that does not belong to this world. Those brave enough to step inside never return the same. A man named Jacob Riis, in 1915, bet his friends that he could spend the night in the factory. The next morning, they found him curled up on the ground, his hair completely white, clutching his head, whispering, "They stitched me, they stitched me." But the most horrifying event happened in 1933. A demolition crew was hired to tear down the abandoned factory, hoping to erase the curse once and for all. They brought heavy machinery, but the moment the first saw blade touched the factory walls, every single machine stopped working at once. From inside the ruins, a scream tore through the air, not from one person, but from dozens of voices, all female, all wailing together as if the entire factory was crying out. That night, the entire crew vanished. All that remained were their tools, scattered across the ground, covered in long, crimson threads, fresh, endless, as if pulled from an invisible sewing machine. Legend says that the curse of the Hawthorne factory doesn't just kill, it takes souls. Anyone who steps onto that land on March 8th will see the spirits of the women appear. They have no faces, only hollow heads with singed hair drifting in the wind, holding giant sewing needles as they silently advance. If you hear the sound of a needle piercing fabric, stitch, 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 it's already too late. They will sew you into the curse, each stitch pulling your soul deeper into their eternal circle. In 1975, an amateur filmmaker tried to capture proof of the curse. Days later, his camera was found abandoned on a sidewalk several blocks away from the factory. The footage showed the dark ruins, then the camera suddenly began shaking violently. A whispering sound grew louder and louder, and then, dozens of pale figures appeared, not from a distance, but right in front of the lens, as if they had been there all along. His voice trembled as he screamed, "They're here! They're everywhere," before the screen went black. But the most chilling part? The final sound recorded on the tape was the rhythmic hum of a sewing machine, continuing for 10 more seconds after his screams had stopped. Today, the land where the Hawthorne factory once stood has been leveled, but people still avoid walking past it on March 8th. Some swear that if you stand still at midnight, you'll feel a cold breath run down your spine, and hear the faint echo of a labor song rising from beneath the earth, the same song Clara and the other women sang before they died. But whatever you do, don't turn around. Because if you do, you'll see them standing right behind you, sewing needles in hand, ready to stitch you into their fate. The site of the Hawthorne factory may be gone, but the legend of the March 8th ghosts lives on. Is it just a fabrication of the human mind? Or are the spirits of those women still fighting for justice, unable to rest? What do you think of this story?